Hi, welcome back to the channel. My name's Rebecca, I'm 45 years old and I used to suffer from multiple sclerosis, but I no longer experience any of the symptoms since starting the carnivore diet just over 2 years ago. In today's video, I wanted to discuss fat because fat is an essential component of the carnivore diet, as we know. When you are on the carnivore diet, you are in ketosis, and that means that your energy is coming from fat instead of sugar, carbohydrates. So it's been a really interesting experience to be in ketosis and to experience how much better the body feels when it's in that state and you're not having, that's my geese, and you're not having, insulin peaks and crashes, and you're not super hungry all the time and craving sugar. There's much more stability and it's mood enhancing and reduces inflammation in the body, and it's just been a complete revelation to me because I grew up in the 90s. I was a teenager in the 90s, and in the 90s it was all about low fat and it was all about calorie counting. This was the cultural messaging that was everywhere, that was inescapable, and it was backed by medical health bodies as much as magazines and television, and it was highly marketable. So basically fat was equated with bad, and there was almost like a moral value attached to calorie restriction. So there was this kind of low-fat industrial boom which was marketed everywhere, and I think low-fat food was very easy to market, and maybe it had a longer shelf life. It suited the food industry. But the thing is, food with fat removed tastes terrible, and what they replaced the fat with were things like sugar and corn syrup and gums and starches, things that were terrible for our health. As I was a teenager at the time, I absolutely fell for this. I myself had an eating disorder. I completely restricted my fat consumption to pretty much zero, and I was very underweight, and I think I didn't develop properly hormonally because of this. So I've come to regret that. I understand now that I'm a carnivore in my mid-40s, I've come to understand that fat is essential for hormones and brain function and for the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. It's absolutely essential to human beings, especially healthy animal fat. So the whole food pyramid, in my mind, has been completely flipped. This is a common carnivore topic, very interesting. I think it was in the 90s that the food pyramid came about, and with the base being grains and the very top of the pyramid being fats and oils, when in fact it should be the other way around, if grains are in it at all. So everything's kind of been topsy-turvy. You can kind of attribute the profit-making element to it, and maybe you can go down a conspiratorial route about the pharmaceutical industry profiting from ill health. I don't know, I'm not going to go down that road. What I would certainly say is that the science was oversimplified. Science was misunderstood and oversimplified, so there was no distinguishing between different types of fat, and fat just became the cause of heart disease. Fat clogs your arteries and raises your cholesterol, and there wasn't really any nuance within that science or within the general understanding of that science. And now science has moved on and become more nuanced, but the cultural messaging is harder to shift. So I myself had the direct experience of this. I really struggled when I first started the diet to contemplate eating the rind of fat on a ribeye steak, and I've seen many a person cut that away since then, and now I notice it and I think, that's the best bit, what are you doing? But it's so deeply ingrained within us to not consume fat. So what can we do about it? How can we unlearn what we were all indoctrinated into believing? The first thing is just simply realizing that the 90s nutritional guidelines were marketing, not truth. And it was an economic trend, and it became a cultural trend. Neither reflected the fullness of scientific understanding as it's come to be developed. If you frame it that way, it becomes easier to detach from it emotionally. I think that's the first step, to try and reframe it in your mind and kind of contextualize it within the flow of history, essentially, to kind of undo that sense of food morality from eating and sustenance. The idea of good foods and bad foods and guilt-free and indulgent, a cheat meal and things like this. This kind of language is very moralizing around food, which is essentially about our sustenance and our health. Those types of labels came from marketing, not biology. That's one thing. It's sort of neuro-linguistic reprogramming to alter, to heal, to try to heal our relationship with healthy food. You don't necessarily have to force yourself to feel differently. Feeling differently comes with being on the diet for some time, but if you're struggling to get your head around the diet, don't stress yourself about feeling differently. Just try to name the script in order to weaken the script and to reframe it. Then maybe it's about developing a bit more context and nuance into your understanding of nutrition. For example, it's, rather than fat is bad, it's like different fats act differently within the body. Whole foods behave differently than processed foods. Feeling satiated and the taste of food and cultural traditions matter too. Perhaps introducing nuance and that type of deeper understanding perhaps could replace fear with curiosity. I would strongly recommend trying to reconnect food with actual lived experience. I think this is probably the most powerful lesson that I've taken from following the carnivore diet. Obviously, it took away my multiple sclerosis symptoms and brought back strength. But I also developed a different relationship with food in that I started to do intermittent fasting and realized that in between the periods of eating, I just felt fuller. I didn't have hunger in the same way that I used to when I was carbohydrate based. Because the 90s diet culture kind of taught us to override things like hunger and fullness and pleasure and satisfaction, and just everything became a numbers game and everything was fear-based. It kind of disrupted a normal, healthy relationship with food that humans should be able to have. Actual food experiences start to counteract fear. Noticing how a high-fat meal makes you feel, whether it's filling, whether it satisfies cravings, whether it gives steady energy instead of spikes and crashes. Paying attention to those things over the cultural messaging is much healthier. Being very aware of your body and the way your body feels and having that consciousness and paying that attention is doing your body a favor. And I think, being aware of the content that you're consuming. In today's world, we don't have to be exposed to those widespread public narratives because we're much more kind of in our echo chambers on social media and the internet. We don't have to seek out that type of messaging. We can stay within our lane and within our own echo chamber that we choose. We can choose which content creators to listen to. There's a lot more content out there which can counteract those messaging. If fat phobia gets triggered easily in you, I think you can try to curate your environment and seek out content creators who prioritize balance and nuance and lived experience. I think the more carnivore content creators that are out there talking about these topics, about the way that the food pyramid's been inverted and the way that the carnivore diet makes them feel and the scientific benefits of cholesterol, help to gradually lead to an unlearning of those years that we were conditioned to think otherwise. I don't think we can snap out of fat phobia instantly. I think it does take time and it does take community and effort, and we can make use of the internet to do that and to help other people to reflect on ways in which they might have come to be conditioned. I do think that, if we just accept that unlearning these old beliefs does take time, I do think it's perfectly possible. I feel very lucky that I came across the carnivore diet, obviously, because I don't live with multiple sclerosis anymore, but I also feel lucky that I came to understand more about nutrition by actually experiencing what the diet has done for me, and that's put me kind of in touch with my body as it's supposed to be, and that in turn makes me feel like more closer to ancestral living and the healthy human that we could be, which is very powerful. What an experience in the world that we're living in today to realize just how much we are conditioned by the messaging around us, and there's so much noise around us all the time and so much marketing, and it's very, very confusing. So thank goodness for the carnivore diet and for carnivores who are working to reclaim that narrative and undo that conditioning, because fat is absolutely essential for our hormones, for our brain function, and for our absorption of vitamins. So we can't do without it. And I would just urge people to give it a go. If you're struggling to get past that hurdle, just try to be aware that that is a cultural thing, not a scientific thing, and it's a marketing thing, and move away from that high octane marketing and towards that beautiful, real, ancestral way of living is the healthiest thing we can do for our bodies and our minds. So there we go. So that's just opened a discussion. I'd be really interested to hear what you guys think. Did you grow up in the 90s? Did you have a phobia-based relationship with fat? And how do you feel now? And what tips would you give to people who are struggling to overcome that? Okay, take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.